we're talking about graphing quadratics. One of the big things I didn't talk that I wish I would have added somewhere on here, but I didn't have a lot of room. If you graph a quadratic, so let's just draw this out really quick. So if you have a quadratic, that's my x and y, and let's make it this color. So this is what my quadratic looks like. There are a couple different parts of that quadratic we need to know. The vertex, draw it a little bit different place. The vertex is the point that is either the lowest or the highest point. I always say that it's my turnaround point. Come back up or vice versa. For me, the hard thing is to write the definition of a vertex. I think is way harder than just looking at it and saying, hey, that's the vertex. So the other thing you need to know then today is the axis of symmetry. Now the axis of symmetry is a straight vertical line. So this is my axis of symmetry. It's the line that makes it symmetrical. So it's the line that when you draw it straight down, it makes the left-hand side match the right-hand side, or it's the thing that you reflect the left-hand side to get the right-hand side. That's the axis of symmetry, and it's always a vertical line. I should have put those definitions up here, but again, at a certain point, I think maybe seeing it is easier than trying to write it out in words. But maybe it's because I can't read. Very possible. And I should work on that. So these are the quadratic. Now, the first couple problems, we're only going to be looking at step 1 and 2, because once you have those 2 steps down, the rest of it, again, you're just plugging numbers into your calculator. The first step is finding your axis of symmetry. Now, a lot of times they'll tell you that is your first step, but I added in there, you're finding the x value of your vertex. And the reason I said that right away, maybe it's not going to help, but a lot of students struggle with connecting that the axis of symmetry is the x value of your vertex. So I shouldn't have erased it, but if you look at that problem I just had up here, if your vertex is right here, then how far left and right do you go to get that vertex? Well, you go left, however many, and that is your axis of symmetry. However many you go left, and that is why that is the x value of your vertex. So if that helps you remember, that's great. If you're lost at all, just plug it into this equation. So to find the axis of symmetry, you plug it into the equation, negative b over 2 times a, or the opposite of b over 2 times a. There's a couple other ways to look at it, but that's the way we're going to do it. Take out the square root out of your quadratic formula. It's negative b over 2 times a, just in case that helps you remember. It'll be on your cheat sheet as well. So step 1 is finding the x value of your vertex by finding the axis of symmetry. Step 2 then is you're taking that axis of symmetry and you're plugging it back in to find your y value. So do you guys remember back when we did questions where you make a t-chart and then you'd plug in like 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'd plug 2 into an equation, and whatever it would get out, you'd put here, then you plug 3 into the equation, whatever it would get out would be here, so on and so forth. That's what we're doing today. The only difference is we're starting with the axis of symmetry. Step 3, we're making a table, just like I had. And step 4, we're doing reflecting on the graph, not like your personal life, or although that's probably healthy. So these first 3 problems already have the axis of symmetry. So don't make this harder than it is. You're plugging it into the axis of symmetry equation. I abbreviate axis of symmetry to AOS a lot. Enjoying that. So my axis of symmetry is the opposite, or negative b over 2 times a. Now I will say, and I don't remember if it was in this class or another one, I would always use parentheses every time I plug a number into anywhere, whether it's the quadratic formula or whether it's just another formula or anything. Anytime I plug a number in, I always use parentheses. Sometimes you don't need it, but it always seems like when you don't use it is when you probably need it. So I just always use parentheses. That ends up giving you negative 8 over 4, and honestly, you can put it in your calculator anyways, but that is negative 8 over 4 is negative 2. That's the symmetry. But keep in mind, it is a vertical line, so technically it's got to be x is equal to -2. When you graph the line, x is equal to -2. We talked about it earlier. X is equal to number is a vertical line. So not too bad. Again, that's it. Just plug your numbers in the equation. Now I put number 2 in here real quick just to give you a little bit of a look. This one, you do not have a b term. I talked about this with the quadratic formula, but don't think that your b term is just the second term. Your b is the term that goes with an x. If you don't have one with an x, your b is 0. So the opposite, or -0 over 2 times 2, is 0 over 4, which is just 0. And that's possible. That happens. That means your vertex will be your y-axis. Any questions? All right, go to number 3. I'm not going to call anybody today just because we're going to be short on time anyways. Yeah, I didn't finish with the last class, but give you a little bit of time to do number 3, then we will move on. All right, I've got my answer up there. And again, not required, but definitely using parentheses makes that negative a little bit easier to spot. And again, honestly, there's a lot of you guys that know how to use parentheses for this part, but once we start plugging numbers into the next equation for the vertex, again, it does help when you have that squared in there, in my opinion. Again, I'm not going to count you off, but that's my words of wisdom. Any questions on those? Hopefully not too bad. So I would argue, in my opinion, you can find the vertex. The graph is pretty easy. But that said, when I say that, I always follow up with, but actually, finding the axis of symmetry, because everything else, the vertex, you're plugging numbers into this equation. So, don't want to explain like that. So remember, I guess I should say, when you graph anything ever in math, you can always do it this way, and this is actually what your calculator does, it just does it on steroids. You can make a T-chart where you plug numbers in, and you can plug in -10, -9, -8, -7, -6, -5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 100. You can do that. That's what your calculator does. It's a program, and it plugs it into this X, and then it gets out a number. And it plugs it into this -9, it gets a number. You can plot those points, and eventually you can connect those points, and you'll have a really nice graph. The problem is, I don't think any of you guys want to plug in 20 points. Maybe you'll get lucky, and you only have to plug in 5, but probably not. So, rather than plugging in points aimlessly, what we're going to do is pick specific points to start with, because that way we only have to plug in the bare minimum. We only have to plug in 3 points instead of 10 or 20. So what is that point going to be? That's going to be your vertex. So that's why we're finding your vertex, and that's why we're going to plug it in. So the reason I brought that up now is because once you have your axis of symmetry, that's the x value of your vertex. To find your y value, just plug that x back in. Anytime I give you x value, if you want to know y value, just plug it into your formula. Find the axis of symmetry, so -16 over 2 times 1. That's -16 over 2 is -8. In this order, for you, I always go wherever I'm putting my answer, and I put that in for my x value. You don't have to, but a lot of students forget. By the end, by the time you put one number, and they don't realize it's an ordered pair. Your vertex has to be an ordered pair. Have an x and a y. X value, and this is what we're going to do two things. Once we get out of this C, we're actually graphing. Once we have the x value, to find the y value, just plug that into your x's. This is where it definitely helps to have parentheses. 8 squared plus 16 times -8 plus 71. And some of you guys already know, the reason it's going to have parentheses is negative right here. If you put that in your calculator without parentheses, it's going to give you -64 instead of positive. It's not nothing your calculator does it wrong. It just doesn't know. It does it differently. It's a computer, so it does it the same way every time. So if you're interested. But for me, I always use parentheses, and the reason is because you can put in your calculator exactly like that. Parenthesis, -8, parenthesis squared, plus 16, parenthesis, -8, parenthesis, plus 71. There are other ways to do this. I think that's the easiest. That gives you the vertex for this one is -8, 7. Up 7. Now again, the good news, once we get on to part C, all we're going to do is we're going to plug 2 more numbers into this original equation. So if you know how to plug numbers into that equation, you're sitting pretty good. Number 6, same thing. First, we have to find the axis of symmetry. So -24 over 2. So +24 over 6, which is 4. And you don't have to do this, but I'm going to put my x-axis or my x coordinate in right away. Now all we need to do is take that 4 and plug it back into my x's. So I have -3 times 4 squared minus 24 times 4 plus 8. Again, this is where if you do this in your calculator, it helps. Because a lot of people, when they do this, they accidentally take -3 times 4 first. And then take 12 squared is 144. It's not the right order of operations. You have to do the exponent first. You have to do the 4 squared first. But again, just put it in your calculator. We don't have to worry about any of that garbage. It's French for garbage. So -3, and actually, if you did this in your calculator already, oh, that's for later. I'll talk about that later. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So type this out in your calculator. You end up getting, I did something wrong. Yes, you're right. So all these are negatives. So same thing. I got 56. So your ordered pair for your vertex is 4, 56. Now here's the deal. If I told you to graph that, I would not give you 56. That'd be way off. I'm not going to give you a graph that has 56 little boxes to go on the grid. But I'm not asking you to graph it. I'm just asking for the vertex. And so that's a completely fine answer. Per usual, I recommend if you get an answer that's too big to double check your work. I'm such a good role model. All right, go ahead, do number 7 on your own. I got 2, 3 for that vertex. Probably wrong, going on my recent record. Okay. So the only difference is now once you find your vertex, we're going to make a table, and we're going to start with that vertex to plug in a couple extra numbers. So these 4 steps, and again, really, step 3 and 4 are different. I just think they should go in the same spot because you're using the same table. The step 1, find your axis of symmetry. That's the same thing we've been doing. So -4 over 2 times 2 is. Now again, I always like to go through over here, and I like to put a dotted line over here where my axis of symmetry is. I personally also like to label that. You do not have to do any of that. Honestly, if I were you, I probably wouldn't. It just makes me feel smart. Again, provided what's been happening right now in this class period, I need every help I can get on that. Step 2 then, find your vertex. So we have the x value of my vertex, and again, obviously it's got to go on that axis of symmetry. So plug that in. We have 2 times squared plus 4 times -1 minus 1. Again, I personally plug that in my calculator because I'm lazy. And that gives me -3. So my vertex is at -1, -3. Make sure that's right, because if you miss that, it's going to mess up the rest of your equation, and I hope it's right. I'm going to go off on faith. So then getting to step 3 and 4. Again, it's just like that table I talked about earlier, but the good news is now I know where I should start. Rather than just starting at like 10, or a lot of people start at 0, we know where the vertex is. So that's where we're going to start, but I'm going to put that in the middle down here. So my vertex is at -1, -3. Remember, this is your X and Y. So step 3 is and plug in some points that are close to your vertex. So honestly, if you wanted to plug in points 2 and 4, I mean, good luck. That's just going to be a little bit of a nightmare. I always plug the ones in that are as close to my vertex as I can. The two small vertex are -2. Be careful with that. -1 is a weird one, where a lot of people think that -2 is bigger than -1, but it's a bigger negative number. And my two bigger numbers, -1 goes to 0 and 1. If you need help with that, look at your X values. So those are the numbers I'm going to plug in. You need at least 5 points to make your parabola. If you only have 3 points, or it could be an absolute value, and it's hard to tell. So I need 5 points. But we're going to cheat a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to plug in 2 of those ordered pairs. We're going to plug in 2 or 0, 1. Pick whatever you think is easiest. If you 3, that's great. I don't think that's easiest. I'm going to do 0 and 1. Now, again, if you want to show your work, you can. I'm just going to plug it in my calculator. 2 times 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 1 is -1. And if you plug in, and again, the nice thing is most of your calculators, I just did this with my step 2. So I just scroll up and I just change all my -1s to positive ones. That gives you your answer. So 0 goes to -1. 1 goes up to 5. Now, there's a couple ways you can reflect this across. And I should say, if you want to plug in -2 and -3, honestly, I thought about teaching it that way, because to make sure you got the right answer, to make sure you got the right vertex, you should plug in -2 and -3 as well, just to double check. But if you did everything else correctly up to this point, to reflect it, all I say is, well, if 0 goes to -1, then on the other side of the vertex has to go to -1. And if 1 goes to 5, then the other side of the vertex goes up to 5. So this one, -2 goes to -1, and -3 goes up to 5. That gives you your parabola. That parabola looks like an absolute value because it's really skinny, but it doesn't matter because I can see ordered pairs. So I was going to double check that quick. Okay, that looks right on mine, I hope. All right. So doing another one, I'm going to skip the you-do problem for number 10, just because we're not going to have a lot of time. But number 9, another really quick one. -4 over 2 times -1. So it's +4 over -2 is -2. Again, you don't have to do this, but that is your axis of symmetry. Your vertex, plug that -2 in. So I have -2 squared plus 4 times -2 minus 3 is -15. At all. What a disaster today's been, huh? Oh, thank you. Sorry, again, don't go too quickly on this. I plugged in was positive and I plugged in a negative, so that should give you a +2. So if you plug it in, that's going to give you a lot better of an answer. Much better. That gives you positive 2. So 2, 1 is right here. And then again, you make your table. I start with 2, 1. The numbers smaller than 2 are 1, 0. The numbers bigger than 2 are 3 and 4. Again, it doesn't matter which ones you plug in. You can plug all 4 of them in. That's not a bad idea. But I'm going to plug in 1 and 0 because oh, it's okay. I thought you were talking about 9 and I was confused. So if you plug in 0, you get negative 3. If you plug in 1, you get 0. So again, I reflect those, 0, negative 3. Then I graph those. So 1 gives me 0, 0 is negative 3. Same thing on the other side. And that is your graph. Again, make sure you go so you don't make a ton of mistakes like I've already done today. Any questions so far? I'm going to skip number 10 because I'll probably mess it up anyways, but we don't have a lot of time. So the next thing we're doing is solve by graphing, and as long as you know how to graph, the solving part is super easy. Because all you have to do is see where it crosses your x-axis. Now, one thing I will say is, just to make sure you guys don't get confused, these are all the same. Solution is the same thing as root. So if I say find the solution, that's the same thing as finding the roots, same thing as finding the zeros, same thing as finding the x-intercepts. All those are the same words. What are the for these graphs? Well, this one right here is over at negative 6 and 0. Now again, we're putting the order pairs for this. We're just saying where it crosses the x-axis. X is equal to negative 6 and 0. If I gave you the formula for that one, and you solved that with factoring or the quadratic formula, that's the answer you should get. So this is another way to solve these. That's the whole idea. We have 3 and 1. That's the solution, 3 and 1. Now remember with the discriminant, you could have them where we only have one answer. So that is x is equal to 1. So if it just touches and then doesn't cross it at all, it only touches it once, so there's only one answer. And this one, there is no real solutions. But remember, I want to try to teach you guys this chapter. That means there's actually 2 imaginary. If it's a short answer problem, I'll accept both. But if it's a multiple choice, I'm probably putting 2 imaginary for that one. So once you know that, to solve by graphing, all you need to do is set it equal to 0 and then solve it like we've been doing. And then, or and graph it like we've been doing, and then see where it crosses your x-axis. So we'd have to add 16, so 2x squared minus 12x plus 16 is equal to 0, and then start going to work on graphing. Axis of symmetry is negative 12 over 2 times 2, so 12 over 4 is 3. Back in, 2 times 3 squared minus 12 times 3 plus 16. That's going to give you your vertex, or the y value of your vertex. Is at 3. Go ahead and do your table. We're going to start with 3, negative 2. So the smaller numbers are 2 and 1. The bigger numbers are 4 and 5. If I were you, most of the time it'll work out where in those 5 numbers you'll get your zeros. But if you ever don't, I would keep going and plugging in some more numbers. It shouldn't take you long to get there, but that way you don't have to guess. So if I plug in 2, I get 0. Well, that already gives you your answer. And if I plug in 1, I get 6. So 2 is 0, 1 is 6. If you reflect those over, 4 is 0, 5 is 6. So again, your answers. Now, the common mistake with this is a lot of students graph this and then they quit. Because they've done all the graphing steps, and they just literally forget you have to do that one extra step when you're solving. So find where it crosses your x-axis. Those are your answers. So x is equal to +2 and +4. And again, we actually know that. I do want you to still graph it, but we know that from our table. Those gave us